I had this awesome opportunity at Punahou to have an amazing education and feel like I have the potential to go out and solve any problem. And at the same time, I recognize that not everybody has that. And so I see education as maybe the most important lever for social change.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be.
My Spanish 5 class, second semester seniors in the non-quote-unquote honors track of Spanish, we were well served by some sort of external motivation to do something in their senior spring. And so they loved the idea of food and gathering people. And I floated this idea of prototyping a cafe, and they were all in, like they wanted to run it. And so we converted there's a little art gallery on the edge of the library at Punahou now, and we turned it into a coffee shop. And people could come in and sit and do work there. They could get a drink or a little snack. Different groups had different little experiences that they designed. Like our kids would ask people to order in Spanish and give them, little cheat sheets about how to do that. But it was really an experiment in what learning spaces can look like. And it also served the needs for my kids of engaging with the language in a way that gave them purpose.
This is Josh Rapoon, and you are listening to the What School Could Be podcast. Before we start the show, please consider joining the rapidly growing What School Could Be global online community. Simply install the What School Could Be app on your smart device or go to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I look forward to seeing you there. Since 2015, Emily McCarren has served as the Punahou School Academy Principal. Punahou is the largest and one of the oldest private schools in the United States. Originally from Vermont, Emily graduated from Colby College in Maine, where she majored in Spanish and biology and was a two-sport athlete. She served as captain of the Alpine ski team and lacrosse team. Emily holds 2 master's degrees in Spanish literature from St. Louis University and in educational leadership from the Teachers College at Columbia University. She completed her Ph.D. in educational technology at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa, where her dissertation examined the role of teacher care on a student's online learning experience. Emily began her teaching career at the Thatcher School in Ojai, California, where she taught, coached, and served as a residential advisor for 6 years before joining the Punahou faculty in 2006. At Punahou, she has taught all levels of Academy Spanish and a year of biology, served as department head of both Asian, Pacific, and European languages, and as Academy Summer School Director. She also led the WOE International Center prior to becoming Academy Principal in the 2015-2016 school year. Emily is the co-author of the series Take Action Guides to World-Class Learners and serves on the boards of the Global Online Academy and the Mastery Transcript Consortium. She is passionate about educational change and the moral imperative to provide all students with the schools they deserve and the world with the schools it needs. Jim Scott, who served as Punahou School's president for 25 years, said the following about Emily, quote, "Within Punahou's rigorous academic program, Emily has broadened student choice, voice, and opportunity around experiential learning, student wellness, inclusion and equity, and interdisciplinary learning that is relevant and enduring. A thoughtful, innovative, joyful, and evolving educator, she has been a national educational thought leader in global education, cross-cultural immersion, mastery learning, and educational technology." And now, here's my conversation with Emily McCarren. Emily McCarren, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So, Emily, you grew up and worked on a horse farm in rural Vermont from age 8 to 22, and you called that time, quote, some serious learning. And you also noted that you did go to this thing called, quote, school, but it had fewer enduring lessons. So you were also the captain of the Alpine skiing team at Colby College, which prompts me to ask, what is this, quote, serious learning, the enduring lessons learned from horses and from your time as captain of an alpine skiing team?
It's interesting that they're similar, actually. I think the lessons from those two sort of long-term endeavors of my youth. The first and maybe most obvious one is just sort of the value of hard work and the sort of the certainty of hard work to be able to do the things you want to do. And then also, I hadn't thought about this, but when you put those two things together, the enduring pursuit of goals over years, over long time, that sort of progress towards what you want and what you want to achieve, what you want to be able to do, whether it's perform at a certain level with a horse or on the ski hill. You can't always measure your progress in weeks or months, or even it's often in years.
Yeah. So this was a long-term thing for you. And I wonder, well, two things. I'm wondering two things. I had this previous episode with a woman in Florida, Ayana Verdi of the Verdi Eco Farm School. And we spent some time talking about the value of animals in kids' lives, Emily. And it was a really interesting discussion because for her, what she brought to the conversation was the idea that being around animals is actually an exercise in empathy. And because you really have to kind of get to know the animal itself, you have to walk in its shoes in order to work with it and care for it and be with it. And I'm wondering what you think about that in terms of your time on the horse farm and even other experiences that you may have had with animals.
Oh, yeah. I mean, animals teach humans so much. I mean, all nature, plants, animals. But for me, horses growing up, that is where I started to learn about, empathy and also the limits of my own will, in some ways that like I could want something to happen, but I really had to think carefully and again, often over long periods of times in order for it to happen. When I was in high school, I was taking care of this woman's horse for the 4 years that she was in veterinary school. And the horse's name was Just in Time. And he was a thoroughbred off the track, like a retired racehorse. And he was a nice horse, but rarely did sort of what I hoped he would do. And so, knowing him was really just a lesson in baby steps and incremental growth and learning. But yeah, animals do a lot of things for kids. The first school, one of the schools I worked at in California called the Thatcher School, the founder of that school would give every kid a horse their 9th grade year. And the saying was that the outside of a horse is good for an inside of a boy. And there's definitely some enduring truth in that. I mean, people just feel better, I think, when they spend time around animals, in addition to everything they learn.
My one experience with a horse when I was young was that my brother Paul put me up on a horse in Montana without a saddle, and about 30 seconds later, that horse threw me a very long way. And I think that was the end of my relationships with horses, but definitely an enduring lesson about, what it means to be small in the universe as compared to large animals,
Yep. It can go sideways pretty quick.
Very quickly. Oh my. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, when we think about teams, and that's been something that's been coming up a lot lately in these episodes with educators, which is great because I'm super glad that conversation is happening now. When you think about being a captain of a team, I think being a captain of an alpine skiing team is a little different from being, say, like I was captain of my football team. Like, how is that different? What was it like being the captain of a ski team like that? What were the complexities of that captaincy?
Yeah. In college, I was captain of the lacrosse team, which is, a team sport, and then also the ski team, which is a more individual sport. And I think the differences are, you're in an individual sport, your success is much less intertwined with the rest of the folks on your team. So in some ways, it's a lot more like school as it's traditionally set up in some ways. Like we all get on the same bus to get to the hill and we all sort of race the same course or train on the same course, but we have different outcomes and we can't really impact each other's outcomes that much. You might think at first that you can't. But actually, when you train with people who are better than you get better. So, having a team of folks that you're skiing and training with and being with, I think really it accelerates and improves performance in a way that I don't think we think about when we think about individual sports. And college is kind of unique around that. And there are a lot of people in the time that I was sort of coming up in ski racing who really believed that, lots of kids would go right from sort of the junior circuit to not me, but kids faster than me would go from the junior circuit, like right into the US team or the Olympic training program.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting school of belief that never really got too much traction, that it's actually really important for those athletes to spend time as part of a team. And so there were some folks, including my husband actually, who were trying to figure out how to funnel those elite skiers through the sort of NCAA route so that they didn't miss that for their own well-being and also for their performance. So it's interesting, like you can try to accelerate one person's performance in isolation, but it ends up with all sorts of complications.
Yeah. Wow, that's super interesting. So kind of switching directions a little bit, you shared with me that you have a great passion for Ulana Lauhala, which is a complex weaving tradition born on the great arc of Pacific voyaging history. And this, of course, sent me down a rabbit hole, Emily, of learning. And by the time I had emerged, I knew more about this weaving tradition than I ever anticipated. So for a minute, let's consider, the humble hala leaf, which is used in this type of weaving, and center it in the context of your life, your humanity, your life as an educator. Like, how did your passion for ulana or weaving begin? And what parts of this tradition's complex history, which, by the way, is part ecological, part cultural, part historic, part educational, grabbed you and drew you in? And what role did something called G-term play in this weaving journey?
Thank you for asking. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So Lauhala weaving is something that I admired from a distance, sort of casually, before 2019. When we launched the idea of G-term at Punahou, the idea was to create spaces where adults and kids were learning side by side, where sort of expertise was kind of reframed as something that lots of different types of people had. We thought about it as an unfreezing of our sort of professional learning, an opportunity to do something with kids without the risk of radical changes to our existing classrooms or curriculum that were there. So that was sort of the purpose of G-term from an educational standpoint. And so in thinking about what's something I want to learn about that I have no expertise in, and how could I call in other experts, I asked some of my colleagues at the time if they would be willing to teach a weaving class. So we had 4 days, exactly 4 days. And it was, what I didn't know was, what that meant. I was asking people who were beautiful weavers, but who weren't necessarily kumu or teachers of weaving. They hadn't been sort of granted that status by the folks who are master weavers in the tradition. And so a couple days later, they brought in 14 of their friends from their weaving group, their weaving hui. And there were 20 students, including me and another faculty member. And we spent 4 days learning about the plant, about how you collect and prepare the leaves for weaving. And then we did a small project. We sort of made a cover for a water bottle. And I just loved that. I've always loved working with my hands. And so I kept weaving. I just kept sort of making more water. I made a cover for every bottle in my house and sort of couldn't stop. And that interest and initiative, some of the folks who were weavers in the community took note of that and were generous enough to sort of invite me to learn my next project, which is how it works in this sort of really tight circle of folks in this space of Ulana Lauhala in Hawaii. Since then, it's been a real obsession, I think is the safe word for my connection to this craft. I've had the really good fortune to learn with amazing people. My kumu is Cal Shibata, was with us in that first G term. And I'm part of a weaving hui that comes from the lineage of knowledge of an incredible woman named Gladys Grace, who was from South Kona on Hawaii Island. And she and another number of master weavers decided at one point that it was really important that they begin to teach people outside of their family. And because their family members weren't invested in perpetuating the knowledge of this craft. And so she started teaching people outside of her family. The state even sort of funded some apprenticeships in lauhala weaving at that time. And now there's hundreds of people who weave in this tradition. And it's amazing. It's taught me so many lessons. Patience, persistence, a lot of the same things actually now that you mention it, that sort of connect to that time on the horse farm as a kid, but also just the opportunity it's a meditative practice once you get going at it. And I've never been one who could sit quietly and sort of meditate to calm my mind. So especially over the last few years, which have been so difficult in schools, this is something that I can turn to that has been quite healing.
Wow. That last part that, here in Hawaii, since this podcast is being listened to all over the place, most people talk about goosebumps, but here in Hawaii, we call it chicken skin. That part gave me chicken skin because I'm thinking about how, there are just so many complex elements to this. But one of them is that when you do something like this, when you have something, I don't suppose it needs to be exactly with your hands. Like, I'm pretty obsessed, obviously, about this podcast and 86 episodes into it. I can't not do it, right? In the same way that you can't not do the weaving. But in times of struggle, in times of difficulty like this pandemic has been, these are things that really carry you through in a way. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about like what that felt like as the pandemic came down and as you were continuing the tradition that, the learning that you were doing with weaving.
Well, the pandemic, as it started here in Hawaii, it created this season of sort of quiet. The visitors stopped coming, things slowed down in a way that was really beautiful. But at the same time, things also professionally were like, we're going 1,000 miles a minute.
Yep.
So that contrast of being able to be in the ocean every day, to go surf in Waikiki without any tourists, to be able to participate in this incredible practice and craft, it created space for those things in a time when there was very little sort of cognitive space for other things as we were trying to rebuild schools online and then with COVID protocols. And I imagine it's similar to the way you feel about the podcast, Josh. The other really incredible gift that weaving gives you when you're doing it, when you're making a hat, which is what I love to weave, when you're making a hat for someone in the tradition in which I learned, you're compelled to only think good thoughts while you're weaving and put positive energy into the hat, because it's something that's going to be sitting on somebody's head. It's a huge responsibility. So if you put bad energy into it, not only will your weaving not look good, but that's a burden you would want to bestow on somebody. And then once you're finished, so you have the incredible joy of thinking about somebody you love or care about, or maybe, I've made hats for people like maybe I don't know them super well, but I appreciate them. And that sort of gratitude practice, there's all sorts of research that shows the benefits of that. And to do that sort of in a sustained way and then give it away, which is another piece of the sort of Hawaiian knowledge that's been so powerful for me in learning about this, that you create things and then you give them to people. And as an educator, that might be something that feels intuitive, but it's actually something that in most cases requires a lot of teaching. We've done a bunch of classes and experiences with the kids now around weaving lauhala. And when you put a lot of time and energy into something, it's not always intuitive to give it away.
Yeah.
You feel like I want to keep this or I want to hold this. And so that's been a really interesting part of this as well.
Oh, that's so neat. I released an episode late last night with the executive director of the Makahana Ka'ike program in Hana, Maui. And I'm now just sitting here thinking that when I texted her with the link, it was a gift. I was giving it away
Yes.
to her and giving it away to the whole community. And I love how you framed that. So coming back to G-Term for a second. So given G-Term was and is specific to Punahou School's culture, although I'm sure there's many similarities at other schools with different names, what might be the first steps an educator or an education leader might take to design something similar at their local public, private, or charter schools, something similar to G-Term with similar intentions?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly did not come up with the idea at Punahou. This is something, I had a January term in college that was the same idea, just a month-long sort of different kind of class than your regular course of study. And lots of schools have these short-term programs. I think the most important thing for a school community to do if they're thinking about embarking on something like this is to determine and share what the purpose of it is and be really clear about what they hope it will achieve for the school community and for students. It's not super compelling to say, oh, we're going to do this little thing because lots of other schools do it and it kind of sounds cool, but to really figure out a message that will resonate with the community and give it a sense of purpose around something that's hard. Because it's, building any new program is challenging. Disruption in sort of patterns and norms and schedule for teachers and families is different. So getting a purpose that everyone can come behind is really important. And there's so many, a G-Term like experience can be the answer to so many questions. How do we create something where our kids can get off of our campus? How do we create learning environments that aren't bound by their traditional course schedules and credits requirements? How do we create an opportunity for our teachers to be designers in ways that push the limits of their comfort? How do we, frame people who are non-faculty as experts in our community? We've also had lots of members of our incredible staff team support G-Term experiences.
Great.
So it can be the answer to a lot of questions and it can be the solution to a lot of problems. But I think identifying which one you want to focus on as a school community will help you sort of frame the experience and sort of bracket what types of things you could do for kids.
That's awesome. And so kind of maybe related to G-Term or possibly unrelated to G-Term, you noted to me that one of your most fun experiences at Punahou was a pop-up coffee shop your Spanish students designed and developed. So what is that story of learning? I was like, what? What was it that got your Spanish students engaged in this project, if that is the right word, like engaged in the project, or actually is the right word a project? Like, was it something more than just sort of a mere project?
Yeah, it was, 8 or 9 years ago now, before I was principal. And we were engaged as a school, just a teeny bit of context for how my kids got to be running a coffee shop in the library. So we were engaged in the conversation across our K-12 campus about the future of libraries. And we were beginning a pretty significant building project in the grades 3 through 5 that was going to involve a reconstruction and redesign of the junior school, so the K-8 library. And the folks in the high school were kind of like, wait a second, shouldn't this be a K-12 conversation? Because if we're going to redefine what a library means to the K-8 students, eventually they become 9-12 students. So we're so fortunate to engage in this really interesting conversation about what libraries should look like, what the purpose of them is, what kinds of work we want kids to be doing in them. If they're a place where kids go to get resources that they need to learn, how have those resources changed? And so we went on a year-long research inquiry about that as a school. People traveled all over the world, looked at workspaces, looked at libraries in community libraries, school libraries, libraries in colleges and universities, and brought back insights from that. And then we synthesized all of those insights into a series of design principles that we thought should represent how kids operated in these spaces that were sort of age appropriate, but across the campus. And one of the design principles that we came to was kids needed I don't know if this is the right word, but it was the one we used, that they needed buzzy spaces where learning was sort of visible and, there was interaction going on and they were cafe-like in their feel. And So because the junior school was busy building this building, the high school, we had no plans or resources to actually rebuild our library at that point. So we thought, well, what we can do is pilot some of these ideas and see what we learn and, really test out what do these design principles look like in practice in kind of low resolution prototypes. And so I was engaged in that project. And my Spanish 5 class, second semester seniors in the non quote unquote honors track of Spanish, we were well served by some sort of external motivation to do something in their senior spring. And so they loved the idea of food and gathering people. And I floated this idea of prototyping a cafe, and they were all in, like they wanted to run it. And so we converted there's a little art gallery on the edge of the library at Punahou now. And we turned it into a coffee shop. And people could come in and sit and do work there. They could get a drink or a little snack. Different groups had different little experiences that they designed. Like our kids would ask people to order in Spanish and give them, little cheat sheets about how to do that. But it was really an experiment in what learning spaces can look like. And it also served the needs for my kids of engaging with the language in a way that gave them purpose. It was a place lots of other Spanish classes would come and have a project there or an experience sort of facilitated by my kids. But it also was just a place to come hang out. It was really fun. It was super fun.
Wow. A buzzy space, right?
Yeah.
Where they could come and do their Spanish, actually, be real in Spanish, learn to speak Spanish,
right.
Speak Spanish with other people. I remember kind of around the same time, I recall finding it wasn't an app, it was an online product of some sort that was called Coffifity. And if you went to it, you could actually select the sounds of coffee shops that would play, right? So I was spending a lot of time alone studying at that point. I think I was getting my master's and I just I need the sounds of people around me.
Right.
And so, I got that. So kind of maybe a weird shift in topic for our listeners, but what the heck? I'm going to go down this path anyway. So I'm going to come back to your weaving. So for the past dozen years, Emily, since Instagram was on the scene, I've used my personal feed to do an art project that I was never encouraged to do when I attended Punahou School. In the past few years, as I went for long walks in Hawaii or on trips outside the state and abroad, I documented my, quote, reading of the world, if you will, my sense of what was beautiful and complex and interesting, my sense of place. And I was using my Instagram feed to do that. In effect, I was capturing my learning. So your Instagram feed, which I encourage our listeners to go see because it's amazing, seems to do the exact same thing. So if anyone is scrolling through at Emily McCarren on Instagram, what is all the learning they would see captured? What hints or direct evidence of mastery or growing mastery might they find in your feed? And not just necessarily about weaving.
Gosh, that's an interesting question. It makes me want to scroll through my feed to see. It's mostly about weaving for me.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, that's where I used to think of myself as an early adopter to sort of social media. And I've been on Twitter for a long time. And that's kind of a more sort of professional education kind of space. And Facebook is where a bunch of, all of us old futs have all of our friends and stuff. It's like our address book. But Instagram felt like a new space. Kind of the way they describe, people who describe learning spaces like coffee shops as the third space. It's not your home, it's not your work.
Yeah.
But it's something else. And that's kind of what Instagram is for me. So it makes me want to post more too. But most of the things on there are weaving. And I think it's because I started using Instagram at about the time I started, or just before, I guess, I became obsessed with weaving. So, and it also has been a way to connect with a community of folks, especially in this pandemic time. And a lot of the weavers are not of the demographic that you might think would be using social media. A lot of them are, but it's been a way to share and get feedback. So in some ways it is like a learning management system.
Yeah.
If you look at the pictures that I've posted, whatever, you see, evidence of weaving and the work that goes into weaving. And there's certainly references, as you were saying, to the natural beauty.
Yeah.
But if you look at my messages, which you can't obviously, but that is super interesting because that's where weavers have given me feedback on things that I've posted.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of it is, sometimes someone might teach me a word for something that I had learned how to do that, I learned a different word, or inviting me to see learn something about the history of something related to something that I've posted. I've also had really interesting and difficult sort of exchanges on Instagram with folks who have really strong points of view about, who should be gaining what kind of gain from traditional Indigenous practices.
Yeah.
I'm not Native Hawaiian by any stretch of the imagination. I'm, haole from the mainland, the continental United States. And so that's also a place where I've learned about that. So yeah, really, it's interesting. It's certainly not what Instagram was necessarily designed for, but.
Yeah, that's just amazing. When I think of my own feed, and as I listen to you talk about what you've posted on Instagram, I'm starting to realize that in some ways I was answering a question, my own question maybe, of what is beautiful. And I wasn't doing that by writing those words. I was doing that by posting what ended up being hundreds of images, not of people, but of places, of everywhere that I was walking. In a sense, I was kind of answering that question slowly but surely. And it sounds like in a way you were kind of answering the question, at least in terms of your weaving of what is mastery? Like what does it look like? And what is the dialogue that happens as you move towards mastery, which is really interesting in that way.
Yeah. And what's the evidence of your process, and what's the progress? And that really resonates, Josh. I mean, in some ways, this answers the question of what am I proud of?
Yes. Right.
And as you mentioned, it's less rare that it should be increasingly common that we ask kids to do that in school. Show me what you're proud of. Show me your best work.
Yeah. I think also in my feed, Emily, I know that we spend a lot of time as educators, and even just in general in society right now, talking about likes, right? And that there's all of these pitfalls and dangers to like culture and all of that. And I know that Instagram has actually changed its protocol so that the likes are not there anymore. But I recall when I was posting photos of what I thought was beautiful on my long walks, and I was looking at the number of likes that are coming in, I was always wondering, like, why would I get 100 likes on one thing and 20 likes on another? What was it that people were interacting with? What was it that they were liking, And I suppose as an artist, you're always wondering that. If you put a piece up and you get a big crowd around that piece, if it's a painting up on the wall, you're probably wondering, why are these people crowded around this piece? That kind of thing. Yeah.
Because I have a teenage child who is deep in the how many that gets signaling some sort of value to whatever was shared.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe because of that, I feel so strongly that the number of likes is not something I have control over or something of great interest to me. It's not a signal that I really value in any way.
Yeah.
Which I probably lean heavier probably because I don't there's not many people interacting with my Instagram page. It's, a handful of my friends and acquaintances. But I do think that the changes being made in that space, the need for someone else to validate your worth is pernicious for young people. And that's just something we keep having to remind folks that, you put it out there because you believe in it, and come what will.
Right.
A little bit.
Exactly. So, hey, everyone, stay with us. We'll be back with more questions for Emily McCarren.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, friends. This is Toy Hirschman from EntreEd. It is my great honor to uplift this excellent podcast, What School Could Be. As always, we are super excited to support innovation in education. We've been lucky enough to feature some of the incredible What School Could Be educators on our podcast. If you are looking to be inspired by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial educators and other great minds from across the world, check out the Entre Ed Talk podcast, and please like and subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey everyone, we are back with Emily McCarren, who since 2015 has been the high school or academy principal at Punahou School. Emily also serves on the board of the Mastery Transcript Consortium and is headed to China this summer to take the helm of the Keystone Academy in Beijing. So Emily, I want to ask you about the building of Kamaola, a voyaging canoe that became the focus of a great deal of learning for Punahou students. You were a key administrator who gave a green light to this complex project. And it's hard for our listeners to imagine what we're talking about, especially those who might be outside of Hawaii. So let's approach this story with two questions. So first one is, what is the brief origin story of Kamaola? Where did the idea come from? And what was the vision and the mission of the project out of the gate? And in what ways was it a pioneering project, if you will, and what were its general learner outcomes? Sorry, that was like 6 questions built into one, but it's just, how did this thing come about?
Yeah, I can take a crack. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this question up. The genesis of this project is one of the things I'm most proud to have been proximate to. It is just really such a cool thing. The idea came actually from the opportunity to really listen to one of our students who had gotten engaged in the voyaging community here in Hawaii and really had the earnest question of why doesn't Punahou, the school that educated, Nainoa Thompson, who's sort of the patriarch of modern voyaging in Hawaii, head of the Polynesian Voyaging Society, why doesn't Punahou have a canoe? Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of simple question. It's not a question that I had really pondered as an educator or as an administrator. I had deeply pondered the question, how do we center this remarkable Indigenous knowledge in our kids' experience? And that's more a question that is appropriate in the space that I was sitting in, the school. And so when this student came with kind of an answer to that question, well, we center it by building a canoe, and that students can have a hand in creating and then be sailing for years and years to come. It really was really easy to say, yeah, okay, how do we figure this out? And I think for me as an administrator, one of the big things that I think, something that's been emblematic of my leadership, I hope, is that I don't have any, if many or any great ideas, but I really believe in listening to people who have fabulous ideas and figuring out how to say yes to them, how to resource those great ideas. And this was a case where this student came surrounded by a bunch of teachers who also hadn't thought of this as an answer to the question, but once they heard it, really wanted to figure out how to make it work, including, experienced an emerging captain in the Polynesian Voyaging Society, folks who have been on the ground since Hokulea's worldwide voyage. And so we just started saying yes. And this project required, a whole new administrative structure. Basically, we had a team of folks that were supporting things in different ways, both from how do you get hulls to a canoe, who makes them, how do you decide what they're going to be made out of, what elements of it can kids be involved in, what elements do we have to sort of farm out, what insurance does this new endeavor require, the less sort of sexy sides of educational programming. How do we find a trailer for this canoe? How do we find a place to store it? And, other folks really dove into figuring out the answers to those questions. And I was just there to support. And it's been amazing. So it's been a very inductive process, I guess. It's like we start building canoe, we see what's next. So we're constantly vector checking as an institution. We're on this path. Is this the right path? Oh, we need to turn a little bit this way, go this way a little bit and check again. I mean, not unlike sailing or navigating in the open ocean. You head somewhere in good faith and you trust that you're going to use all the facilities and talents and resources to get where you need to go, even though you're a little uncertain of where you're going. I mean, that's the lore of sort of Polynesian migration and navigation across the Pacific.
Right.
So it made sense to sort of have that ethos in this project.
Right.
And yeah, so the learning outcomes are, I mean, it's a tool for engagement, like a lot of sort of experiential things. I mean, we have a canoe. So we started the first year with some elective courses well, the first year was it was a project. It was like a club that kids were engaged in, and, they could come and, lash stuff or build, sand the yakos or whatever. And then we had elective course that 11th and 12th graders could take. And now next year, Josh, there's voyaging at every grade level in the high school.
Oh,
there's
man.
a 9th grade class, a 10th grade class, 11th and 12th grade classes. And kids could really choose that as a pathway, or they could dip their toes in it and be engaged in it. So it's really exploded. There's lots of interest, lots of excitement. It's really, really beautiful.
Wow. And I just see it as sort of the embodiment, the literal representation, the modeling of It Takes a Village. And you start with an idea, and then you get a bunch of people who get behind that idea. And then all of a sudden, everybody's offering their inputs, they're offering their hands, their minds in the process. And it just begins to move forward, just like literally like a voyage moves forward. You at some point, what's marvelous to me is that at some point you unmoored from the dock, literally, and sailed on this program, right? And it took a lot to make that decision, given the context, within which it was born. So that's really cool. So I want to ask, in the story of Kamaola, there's one person, a recent Punahou graduate named Cole, and he got very involved in the emerging voyaging program as a voyaging club leader and much more. And now he's studying business at the University of Utah. So what are, Emily, the so-called transferable skills Cole took with him to Utah? Like, what is the case to be made for Cole taking a voyaging elective rather than, say, another calculus course or some other course suggested as pre-business, given that, time is limited and you can't do everything. There are only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah. I mean, if someone wanted to emerge in the business field, the things that we hear from folks in that field, navigating uncertainty, figuring out how to work with diverse teams, optimizing resources available, increasing efficiency. All of those things are things that are so clear and evident in a program like this. Whereas, yes, you could take another sort of high-level math course and there'd be some signal of achievement in a place, maybe adjacent to the business space. But I can't imagine anything more useful than doing something like this if you wanted to be an entrepreneur or go into business. It's just, we're talking about generating and building bravery in kids and the ability to take calculated risks, to know how to leverage the talents of the people around you. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. It's amazing. It seems a little bit controversial sometimes.
Yeah. So this seems like a good segue into CBL, or competency-based learning. I'm going to read a definition of CBL from Punahou's website and ask you a couple questions about it. So competency-based learning, or otherwise known as CBL, is an academic framework that emphasizes the value of student-centered personalization with classroom and assessment practices that work to support the unique learning path of every individual student. So in what ways is the voyaging program, which is an elective of sorts, but as you've described, it's now become way bigger than that, a prime example of CBL in practice? Like, how can we use the voyaging program to explain to our listeners what CBL is and what it means in practice?
So competency-based learning is exactly what you just described. So it's a structure that allows a system of assessment and reporting that holds a school and a teacher, and in the classroom context, accountable for moving kids towards the named learning outcomes. And the voyaging program, as we get really clear as a school about what our learning outcomes are, and we name them and we break them down into their smaller pieces, we find that so many of the things that we really want kids to learn, sort of, creativity, empathy, communication skills, collaboration skills, understanding their worldview and where they come from, the way that their past impacts who they are and what their path forward is. All of those things that any school identifies as the learning outcomes. Once you start doing that and you're really honest with yourself, you see that kids can achieve those in lots of ways that are actually adjacent to what we would call the traditional academic curriculum. In team sports, for example, that's where so many kids point to when you ask them where do they learn about sort of collaboration and communication even. And yet we devote tons of time in other subjects towards those ends. So it's really about schools getting really concrete and in some ways efficient and putting resources towards those things that actually engage kids and really move the needle on those learning outcomes. And the Voyaging program is just a very cool example of that. It's a place where kids' engagement shifts from the 3 sort of levels of engagement. You're sort of affectively engaged, cognitively engaged, or behaviorally engaged. And behavioral engagement is what most kids are in school, right? Good students, they do the work or whatever. And cognitively, like they might find it kind of interesting, but like affectively is like they are passionate about, like you're in it. Like it's the way you feel about this podcast, the way I feel about weaving, like you can't imagine not doing it. And so you're willing to do hard things to learn what you need to learn. And it turns out all those things that you need to learn to be good at these are the things that we want schools to teach people. I mean, this one happens to be a particularly beautiful Trojan horse in some ways because it also answers that need of centering Indigenous knowledge and place-based learning in a traditional academic curriculum.
So I was going to ask you about, for example, the difference between a biology class or a chemistry class not using CBL versus, either of those 2 classes using CBL as an approach. And I think you just answered that question. So let me kind of shift it. To me, Emily, one of the fastest ways to get parents to bust out their pitchforks and go on the warpath is to propose shifting from a grades-based transcript to a competency-based or mastery-based approach to reporting learning. So what are the fundamental objections of parents writ large in your experience with CBL?
I think any objections that we experience in that space come from a lack of understanding about what colleges and universities are looking for. Because the fundamental foundation of those objections is actually based in a very real fear that this change somehow limits their kids' access to what they want after high school. That's all. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, people who are school administrators know and see this every day. Whenever a parent feels like what's something we might call as difficult with the school administration, it's, most of the time it's because they love their kid so much and they want everything for them. And so, digging down into that, that's really what we saw with competency-based learning. People just want to make sure that their kids are going to have access to extraordinary opportunity after high school. That's really the only barrier.
So, kind of pushing this a little bit further, I think it's common knowledge Punahou School experienced such a CBL pitchfork moment, or maybe a couple of them. I read online 2 letters from Punahou's president, Mike Latham, who wrote to the school's parent community. And the first reads a little bit like a retreat from CBL in the face of pretty intense opposition. But the second reads like some progress was made in the intervening months towards a greater understanding of how CBL achieves, quote, the aims of a Punahou education. So what happened? What can our listeners learn from Punahou's experience as it moves forward with this?
Well, I think that what happened was we really leaned into communication and education with families about what we were doing, what's staying the same, what's different, all of the research behind why CBL works, that it actually is increasing and improving student outcomes. And also, we made it really clear that this was, Punahou would take a path that was appropriate for Punahou's ability to navigate a slower rate of change. So whatever the organization's ability and tolerance for change has to be considered. When we started the work, the sort of shorthand was, we're getting rid of grades. And by the time we sort of went through a really intense season of parent education and partnership, it was Punahou is continuing to explore changes and innovations in learning and education, as it always has. And it is leveraging those and and also expanding those and scaling those where they're deemed to be successful and appropriate and where there's interest on the part of kids and families in those experiences. So it was really about parent education. And I've thought a lot about if I had it to do over again, leading with that as opposed to trying to explain with that. You know, we did a little bit of parent education out front, but we could have, we had dozens, I think 20 like 2-hour sessions that parents could sign up for.
Wow.
Where they could come hear a little bit about the research behind it. And then we gave them a clipboard and they go observe a class and look for student engagement and actually sort of measure it as educational researchers and then come back and discuss. And every single person, every single parent who attended or family member who attended one of those sessions came back thinking, gosh, that was really interesting. That's super well researched. I want my kids in those types of classes. And there still might be questions about, it's a different way of assessment than most people experienced in school. Although you also can point out people who went to medical school, people who went on to other fields where there's apprenticeships or practices. The assessment model is actually it's not new. It's the way that organizations measure growth and performance where people's lives are on the line if people underperform, like medical school. So it's really actually quite effective.
And that's been happening for thousands of years.
That's right.
Because that's really the way that people have trained. I mean, it goes right back to your weaving, in effect, which is low stakes. It's not that I'm getting heart surgery, but mastery is what mastery is, right? That's super interesting.
Right. Yeah.
So, hey, everybody, stay with us. We'll be right back with more questions for Emily McCarren.
This is Guy Kawasaki. If you want to learn how to be a remarkable person, please check out my podcast, Remarkable People. I interview people like Roy Yamaguchi, Margaret Atwood, Jane Goodall, Stephen Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Ariana Huffington, and Steve Wozniak. The point of the podcast is to help you become a little bit more remarkable. To learn more, go to remarkablepeople.com. Thank you.
Aloha, my name is Aaron Shorn, a previous guest on this very podcast. I am also now head of growth and community at Hawaii's own Unruler. Unruler is a collaborative mobile and web platform that accelerates innovation, grows culture and community, and celebrates learning. Learners post multimedia, tag their learning, and through comments are able to work together asynchronously. Each post is a moment of learning that forms the foundation of a joyous learning journey. We can be found at unrulr.com. Mahalo.
Hey everyone, we are back with Emily McCarren, the soon-to-be former Academy Principal at Punahou School in Honolulu and soon-to-be Executive Head of School at the Keystone Academy in Beijing. So, Emily, I'm going to keep going with this subject. You shared with me a remarkable video from your personal and professional website, which you described as capturing Punahou School's aspirations going forward. And in that video, which features multiple alumni voices speaking about learning by doing, Albert Cheng, Punahou class of 1998, and now the Chief Operating Officer at Amazon Studios, says that in reality, when you get out into the world, grades don't matter anymore. What matters is one's ability to take a problem and solve it and showcase it and deliver on that particular idea. So I have a couple of questions about this. In effect, all of the Punahou alumni featured in this film are challenging Punahou to change. And if I'm a teacher at Punahou, do I have institutional permission to deep dive into CBL, PBL, mastery, and challenge-based, place-based, culture-based learning? Like, do I have institutional permission to move away from grades and other types of, maybe we might call them reductive metrics? And what happens when it comes time to submit grades? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions in this space for Punahou and institutions like Punahou, who have been, quite successful by traditional measures. One, what's the impetus for change in a context like that, and what are the risks associated with that? So Punahou has decided that it's not, teachers don't have permission to move away from giving grades. They do have permission to, you can look at all of the Aurora Institute has an incredible definition of competency-based learning that really is about student agency and effective feedback. And you really can design towards all of those values and still give grades at the end of the day. And that's an improvement. So the sort of all or nothing thing, that's not going to work quickly in a lot of schools like Punahou. Different schools have taken different approaches to this, like the Hawkins School in Cleveland, which is run by the founder of the Mastery Transcript Consortium. They have the Hawkins School, and then they started a second high school from scratch that's based on where the students there will have a mastery transcript, and that's all going to be based on a gradeless transcript. But their theory of change was that you actually have to have, proof of concept in order to make the more traditionally successful places accept it. And the really amazing thing about the Mastery Transcript Consortium so far is that already we have hundreds of kids who have been admitted to, I think, over 100 different colleges and universities with mastery transcripts. So even in the first few years of the organization, that proof of concept is there. Like, kids get into college. We don't have to, and into highly selective colleges and universities. So we don't have to sort of wonder about that anymore.
Yeah.
But at Punahou, people have to give grades at the end of the semester. And we've created all sorts of systems and algorithms for in the courses where teachers want to leverage these pedagogies for minimizing kids' interaction with percentages or letter grades. But at the end of the day, we're still giving graded transcripts for the time being.
But in effect, over time, very slowly over time, you're weaving a new tapestry. It's a new quilt, if you will.
Yeah, I hope so.
It takes time to do that. And I'm also thinking that, like any skill, I mean, even for an educator, the process of using something like competency-based learning or working towards mastery learning is a skill that an educator has to learn how to use well. And that if it's not used well, it can actually be pretty disastrous, in effect. And the other thing that, you prompt me to think about is that I was part of I attended a Getting Smart town hall. Tom Vander Ark, he does such a great job of these town halls. And the subject of the town hall had to do with sort of where are we in mastery right now. And I was so encouraged, Emily, because I had a couple of college admissions officers speaking on a panel. It's just like, it's amazing how many colleges are really pivoting at this point and making all things possible for all kids to be able to demonstrate their artifacts of learning, just like you've been doing in your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
So I feel encouraged in this moment. So awesome. So Emily, I chose this next question because you are in an epic between space, between Hawaii and China, between principal and head, between one life and another life, which is a good place to reflect and look back. So your resume, which lists a whole series of presentations and writings, many of which, maybe the majority of which, are about learning online. These presentations and writings go all the way back to 2011. And this list includes your dissertation, which is titled, quote, Care Tactics, the Role of Perceived Teacher Care in Students' Experiences in Secondary School Online Courses. So what really jumped out at me as I deep dived into all you have written and thought about is the extent to which you were prepared for a global pandemic. No one saw coming, not even you. So I wonder if you can talk about what was going through your mind and maybe even in your heart, what you were feeling in those crazy moments when Hawaii and the nation locked down and suddenly shifted to online learning. Like, what did you feel needed to be done at that moment? What did Hawaii and the nation, even the world, do right? And what were the opportunities maybe that we missed?
Such a big question. So I'm very grateful for the experiences I had prior to the pandemic in the online space, because I remember vividly coming back from a conference on the East Coast of the US, at the end of February 2020. And it was sort of looking like, gosh, if the world's not going to change, we're going to have to do things a little differently for the next couple of months. That's kind of what we thought.
Yeah.
And having the experience that I had had in the online learning space and the research that I was lucky enough to do, I knew that all that mattered was the relationships that we took care of. between teachers and kids, between teachers and teachers, between teachers and their families, between administration and teachers and parents. And if we framed our work in care of those relationships, we would be okay. Yeah. So we gathered the administrative team in the academy and, across the campus and just said, okay, tomorrow we're going to let the faculty know that they need to take their computers home over break and that we're going to have access to these sort of technological resources and that we're going to be flexible and kind to each other and we're going to iterate when we need to and we're going to be okay. And that was sort of all the instruction we gave people for the first few months. And obviously we spent the next few weeks rebuilding a school schedule and making sure prior to the pandemic, we had teachers who didn't take their computers home at night, who certainly didn't have their coursework up on Canvas or whatever learning management system. So it was a real leap for a lot of folks, but we got through that initial part with care, which was so essential. And then as we recognized that things were going to go on, we leaned a little bit more into the technical skills of creating spaces where kids could experience care and also engage in deep learning. So we improved a lot from those first few weeks to when we reopened school the next fall, also online. We became a really excellent online school.
Wow. Relationships. It comes up in every conversation I have for this podcast. That always seems to come back to that. And that was your first impulse, was we have to take care of each other. But that's born out of your experience in research.
Yeah, I had researched that. I trust that I would have had some hunch like that if not, but I spent years deeply immersed in sort of educational literature and medical literature around nursing and the perception of care in those life and death kind of contexts. And it matters. It matters. Yeah. You can't minimize it.
My experience both as a history teacher, but also as a person who was specializing in ed tech, and this goes back to like 2010, 2011, around there when it really started to accelerate. I recall, Emily, that for a while there, we all kind of went off the deep end and got very obsessed with the devices, the iPads and everything else that was happening. And then at some point, educators started to course correct and they started to go back to the pedagogy, but they also started to go back to the relationships part as well. And I look back and I'm feeling encouraged that we, as a collective community, more or less, were able to make that course correction because it's so easy to get pulled in by the devices, whatever they happen to be, or the apps or everything else like that. And I wonder what you think about our ability to be able to do that. Have we gotten better as a result of the pandemic to make these kinds of course corrections that are in the interests of everybody in these education communities?
I think we have. I'm an optimist, sometimes to a fault. So, but I do believe that, we've really raised the floor in terms of our ability to leverage technology to reach across time and space. It's not abnormal now to send an asynchronous video message to somebody, or it occurs to every teacher all the time that they can call anyone in the world and that person can visit their class now.
Yeah.
There were lots of people who had that instinct prior to the pandemic, but now there's nobody who doesn't have access to that.
Yeah.
And when technology is really brilliant, as you know, and talk about all the time, is it disappears. You're not shocked by the technology, you're shocked about what the outcome is that was facilitated by the technology.
Right.
So it becomes sort of invisible. And the best part of all of this is that as much isolation and real, trauma that folks have endured, there's also been the capacity to reach out across time and space and know how important that is. We are in a terrible season with respect to the sort of mental health of our young people. And a lot of that was happening before the pandemic, and the pandemic accelerated that. And the role of technology in that is, it's hard to disassociate those two things, but technology can be an incredible strength. And bottom line, if kids don't have connection to humans who are caring for them and seeing them and knowing them and helping them belong, they'll seek that out in other ways. that are less healthy than the things that we can create in school or family communities. So it's just about making sure that we're using technology to create community, not to isolate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Emily, we're here at the end. And speaking of connecting to other humans, this is that moment when I often ask guests to shout out to someone, some giant upon whose shoulders they stand. So Jim Scott was the president of Punahou School for 25 years, and you cited him as one of those giants. So what has Jim Scott meant to your life as an educator and as a person?
I'm so grateful to Jim and his really big visions for Punahou and for his trust in me, a young teacher from another part of the world who came here and was just sort of enchanted by his sense that our big, really successful school can mean something to kids who don't have the chance to go there. And that's something that's really framed my educational philosophy, that a school has two responsibilities. It has the responsibility of educating the kids that attend the school, and it has the responsibility of asking big questions about how that work can be done better and then sharing it. And Jim is really persistent and consistent in that message. And I think that message really attracted a lot of people to Punahou. It's, kept a lot of people there and just produced some really incredible experiences for kids and educators who aren't employees of Punahou and don't attend the school.
I taught at Punahou as well back in the 90s, and Jim and I actually came on board at Punahou at the same moment in the same year. And the thing that I remember most, and it's something that he's repeated over and over and over again, is, a phrase that he used often when he was speaking to the faculty and staff. And that phrase is, to whom much is given, much is required. And it feels like he's lived his life that way. And it sounds like that's, your relationship with him, and especially the trust part, Emily, that's huge. I think if our listeners were going to walk away with anything, it's that a trusting relationship between administrators and faculty and staff who are responsible for the kids is absolutely key, right?
It is. And it's fragile and so important to keep an eye on. And I mean, that is really emblematic of Jim's leadership. He pointed to the North Star and then invited people to figure out how to achieve that. That trust in the community and in the strength and wisdom in the community was really extraordinary and created opportunity for some incredible things to happen in the world.
Yeah, that's great. So to all of our listeners out there who are potentially moving up, the leadership path, build trust, build it early and build it often. That's the thing, right? So Emily McCarren, thank you for this time today. Wow, you're in such a crazy moment. You're getting ready to move to China. And it's just wild to me that you're going to pick up your stakes and pack your suitcases and head off to Beijing to be the head of the Keystone Academy. So we really appreciate you taking the time, because it's a special moment. You're kind of looking back as you look forward. And we hope that you and your family stay safe and in good health. And thank you for this time.
Thank you, Josh. Mahalo. Thank you for everything.
My editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music comes from the vast catalog of music created by my friend of 40 years, the remarkable pianist Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all the major music platforms. You can also find his work at his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and over 2,000 cities to date. Support these episodes with remarkable, innovative, and imaginative educators and education leaders by giving us your own rating and writing us a review at your favorite podcast store. This series is sponsored by education change agent Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the acclaimed documentary film Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book What School Could Be. Please join the What School Could Be global online community by going to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or by downloading the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow us on Twitter at WSCB Podcast or at Josh Rapoon. Friends, Even as COVID infection numbers decline, stay safe and please get vaccinated. Most of all, bring kindness and compassion into the world. We need a surplus of both right now. Until the next episode, ahui ho, and take care.